Our holiday in 1990 was spent in two very similar areas: West Pennard on the Somerset levels and the Tenterden area of Kent. Both are very low-lying areas,
which were once marshy inlets from the sea, with a few islands dotted about here and there.
The famous island in the Somerset region is of course Glastonbury Tor, but the Kent has its equivalent, a hill once an island called Chapel Bank, once the Isle of Ebony. This is the centre of a number of interesting leys. It was once the site of a church, but this was dismantled and rebuilt in the nearby village of Reading Street. We stayed in Rolvenden, in a street leading to the church, which is also a lay centre. Standing high on a rise to the south of the village green, this is a prominent sandstone building of 13th and 14th century date. It's on a lay to Tenterden Church, which runs along Tenterden High Street and grazes the museum, and also another through the Isle of Ebony to Appledore Church. The font is about the same date and shows the arms of two prominent medieval families, the Guilfords and the Culpepers. The screen, featuring a dragon, was added by W.D. George in the 1920s.
St Mildred's Church in Tenterden is on another lay from Rolvenden, which continues through a crossroads tracks and coincident stretch of road at Stubbs Cross, and two churches at Willsborough and Hinksall near Ashford. It dates from about 1180, and moderate head hum can be felt there. Tenterden Museum, about 20 yards off the line just mentioned, is another of the surprising places where head hum was felt. It was built about 1850 and has been a stonemason's and a builder's workshop before it was made into a museum.
On the top of the Hill of Ebony there was once a church called St Mary the Virgin. The church suffered a fire after being hit by lightning in Elizabeth I's reign and fell into disrepair. It was abandoned, and residents worshipped in nearby Reading Street. The church was moved stone by stone to Reading Street. It was seemingly subconsciously sited, as there is a lay from the old site to Reading Street. There is also one from Rolvenden, which goes through Appledore Church. Gravestones from the old church are still on the hilltop. From Stone in Oxney, the view across the marshes takes in Dungeness Power Station in the distance. The Church of St Mary is 15th century, an elegant building which stands on rising ground. The font stands at the west end of the nave, octagonal with no ornamentation. The most interesting possession of the church is the Roman stone altar under the tower by the west door. The top is hollowed out as a basin, and the figure of a bull stands in relief on all four sides. It's made of Kentish ragstone, quarried at Hythe. There is a lay from this church to the Chapel Bank Centre, which runs along about a mile of coincident track each side of the church.
Southdown Cottage is in West Pennard, a few miles from Glastonbury. Situated halfway up the slopes of Pennard Hill. There are two pine clumps visible from the cottage, which align with one end of it. In the garden on the alignment, a tree has been planted in the middle of a small mound within a circle of rose bushes. The line passes through the house, about through the middle of the spiral staircase. There's moderate head hum felt in the house, but it seems to be strongest on the axis of this line. Passing through the wall here, it next passes across this stone-flagged courtyard and then runs along another path, also stone-flagged but almost lost and now obviously not in use. Head hum in the garden is felt somewhat more strongly than in the house. There seems to be some earthworking around the base of the first clump, which does in fact contain 3 trees rather than the 2 visible from the house. The third is a somewhat younger one. The second clump is very conspicuously visible from the road. And as we approach it, we can see that Glastonbury Tor is visible from this point as well. Even though on this particular day it's rather too misty to see it properly. The other clump and Southdown Cottage are visible from this clump. A small stream runs round the base of it. But along the alignment, very little can be seen because there is a hill in the way. In a slightly different direction, however, Glastonbury Tor is still visible, as is the lane going down towards West Pennard. From the next field we can see the tower of West Pennard Church. An adjoining track curves round to run along this line. This track is beside Southtown Cottage. It runs past a Somerset orchard in full fruit and disappears across the field into the distance. The lane coming up to Southtown Cottage roughly follows the alignments of these clumps, but at the cottage it makes a sharp turn. It then climbs very steeply up the side of Pennard Hill as a sunken lane. The lane becomes deeper and deeper until we come to this attractive little gorge of soft sandstone. The strata and the overhanging rocks make it a mini cheddar on our doorstep. And at the top of the hill, a beautiful view over the Somerset countryside.
Of particular interest to me in this area. The first is the one going through these clumps, the second is the famous St Michael line discovered by John Michel, and the third is the baseline of Philip Heselton's Great Isosceles Triangle. The St Michael line crosses the country, going through such places as Royston, Avebury, Glastonbury, Brentor and St Michael's Mount in Cornwall. The baseline does too, at a slightly different angle, going through sites of UFO significance such as West Mersey where a landing took place, Reading where a flap occurred, and Cradle and Clay Hills at Warminster. It also goes through the prominent site of Inkpen Beacon. Recently, new discoveries have been made on the St Michael line by Paul Broadhurst and Hamish Miller, in which sinuous Michael and Mary lines have been found by dowsing to follow the direction of the St Michael line, the whole structure taking on the form of the caduceus with its twined serpents. The clump alignment is not very spectacular as a lay on the map. To the southwest it passes through this crossroads. In the other direction it goes through a multi-junction of roads and tracks north of the Tor, several crossroads and cross-tracks across the Somerset levels, then leaves the coast at Burnham-on-Sea. But it may have other places that only fieldwork would reveal. Certainly the two clumps would not have been detectable from the map. West Bradley Church is on the Triangle baseline lay, and it's also on Paul Broadhurst's sinuous Mary line. Glastonbury chairs in the sanctuary. An ancient gravestone from the 16th century. The font in this church is situated under the tower. With an octagonal design in the roof. Stone steps lead to the belfry. In the churchyard, the line passes through this very striking double tree. In the other direction, it goes through this pond. The neighbouring West Bradley house also seems to be of octagonal design. And the ley passes through this multi-junction. The next point on the baseline ley is Ivythorn Hill, once an island like Glastonbury Tor. This attractive 1913 youth hostel was built on the baseline ley, but very little is visible in the distance on a misty day like this, not even Glastonbury Tor. The youth hostel and a clump, which are both on the line of the ley. Othery Church, the west corner of the Great Isosceles Triangle, and also on the sinuous St Michael line, though the straight one just misses it. The striking figure of St Michael over the porch, the spear and twisting form of the beast seem to represent the straight and serpentine St Michael lines. I had to search to find this curious tile of St Michael with a human-headed dragon, hidden discreetly under an altar carpet. Paul Broadhurst found the building was aligned to the flow of the twisting St Michael line. Many years before I also found that it's slightly out of true east alignment, just enough to make it line up with the baseline of the Great Isosceles Triangle. Burrow Mump was occupied by the Romans and then by King Alfred in 879 to protect the upper waters of the Tone and Parrett from Danish incursions. Later a Norman castle was replaced by a chapel of St Michael dependent on Athelney Abbey. The chapel survived the dissolution but was partly destroyed in 1645 when held by royalist troops after the Battle of Langport. The existing remains are mainly 18th century, when the site was reclaimed in honour of St Michael after a turbulent past. The distant view is shrouded in mist today, and even Glastonbury Tor is out of sight. But the straight St Michael line passes through here, and the sinuous Michael and Mary lines also meet here at a node. A very special place indeed. The line then goes westward across Devon and Cornwall to leave the coast at the island sanctuary of St Michael's Mount, Cornwall. It's interesting to note that the straight St Michael line runs along the major axis of Glastonbury Tor and also through the two stones on the south-west ascent route and another to the north-east on Stone Down. This is one of the stones,